Well, welcome back. Here we are in week 10. I hope you had a restful break. Maybe a few less things to do. Maybe you actually got some things knocked off your to-do list with that break. So good for you if you've done that. Here we're going to be talking about chapter 9, midlife. I call it midlife events. Now, the kind of quirky thing about midlife is when we talk about when it's going to happen is it really the midpoint of life? Or is it really meaning you're, if we're going to call midlife at 50, that means you're going to live to 100, right? If it's the middle. And that's actually not very common. So it's not really necessarily the notion of the midpoint in your life. We don't know what that is. The statistics tell us when my midlife was like in my late 30s, based on statistics. Now, that said, there are social components, psychological and physiological components that come up and bring us to a point in life. And this is the way I've always characteristics that I refer to as a midlife event. Now, because there are external circumstances that might be involved in this can happen at maybe multiple times. So we can just call them sort of like identity events, because I had one when I was 25, have not really had, kind of to tell you the truth, going through a little one right now. I'll explain that. I'll share that information with you about this idea of something comes along and we recognize the process of our aging. Now, the midlife event is characterized by the notion that I reach a point in my life where, figuratively, there's more behind than there is in front of me. Many more years behind than in front of me. And I become aware of that because changes in my physiology. These things happened a while back for me, but my hair color changed. I couldn't hop out of bed quite the way I used to. The physical activity produced a longer recovery. All these physical aspects, along with career aspects and social expectations, my kids growing up and leaving the house, any one of those factors that comes along makes me realize for the first time, not for the first time, but gives me a strong feeling of my own personal aging. The notion that I'm approaching the end and that it becomes something that's, maybe within sight, years down the line, but still much more present than it was when I was younger, provides the opportunity for me to pause and think about this point. Am I on the right track? Anticipating, in this case, Erickson's last stage of integrity. At the midlife point, we may ask ourselves, am I doing what I need to do? Am I doing what I want to do? And I may find out that in fact I am, and that's great. And I don't necessarily have to make any changes. The chapter takes some time looking at the notion, well, what if we do make changes? What if we get to that point? The kids are gone, jobs, blah. And we think, maybe some of you came to that point and like, I've always wanted a degree. Well, dang it, I'm going to do it now because I don't have that much time left. We get this sort of sense of urgency that I need to take steps now. And that pressure becomes what we call a crisis. So we get the midlife crisis. That word crisis, I want to take away the mystique associated with that, the envision that we have of the middle-aged man who goes through a midlife crisis, divorces, gets a sports car, gets an earring, dates someone named Buffy. That's nothing wrong with the name Buffy, by the way. But you know, upturns his whole life because of that. Now, there's some psychology behind that reality, the fear of aging, the reverting back to a sense of adolescence, of irresponsibility, of selfishness that can occur when this gets out of control. The thing that we usually refer to in our society when we think somebody's going through a midlife crisis. I'm advocating that there is a midlife event which may lead us to a crisis in the same way that we talk about crisis when we look at James Marcia's theory. And James Marcia's identity status theory looks at crisis and commitment. And the crisis in that point is defined as I'm looking at the options. I'm not necessarily destroying lives. I'm not necessarily turning over every table. I'm not necessarily doing any of that. I'm simply asking myself, am I in the right place right now? Do I have goals and things that I want to accomplish while I'm on earth? And I need to get started on those now. And I think there's many people, just thinking about the composition of this class, there's many people in here that meet that criteria. You got to a point in your life and said, I want to make a degree happen. It's been a goal for a long time. You may have been thrown into that because your job disappeared. You might have been your kids went off and they started doing it. So a little bit of competitive jealousy. I'm going to do it too. I like what they're going through. I want to do that as well. Or maybe your life became stable enough that you were able to now do it. You have enough money in the bank. You have, I can manage my time better, and I can make the choice to do those kinds of things. So I'm trying to take some of the horror associated with midlife and thinking about it more as an opportunity to make the changes that you need to make. So we think about the things that push us into this event. Now, I went to all the physiological things that I know happened to me. And then we have things like a graduation. I list them in here: an unexpected pregnancy, a life-threatening illness, a loss of somebody when your parents die, or people around you die, world events, that signify a sense of mortality for us. The simple opportunity when we're talking about career and we talked about happenstance, that something comes along and you're ready for it now. So that message gets to you and like, yeah, I haven't been thinking about that, but at this point in my life, I'm ready to do that. So you step forward and you do that. Spiritual growth, any one of these things that leads you to a point at which you start asking these questions and maybe doing some searches as to what you want to do about it. Now, this brings in the developmental clocks. It brings in the social clock in terms of expectations for what people are doing. And I know in my teaching career, because my teaching career formally started at a community college, my initial experience with college students, aside from when I was a college student, was that they were in later life. Not late life, they were in their late 20s, 30s, 40s, because I went to a community college. That's where I was teaching. So a lot of my students were individuals who were transitioning from one type of work to another. There were individuals whose kids had finally left home, and now it's their turn to go take care of things. People that were expanding their social horizons, their intellectual horizons, and a very, very energetic, directed group. Very different than the way in which many people enter college if they go to college right after high school. I certainly didn't go to college right after my senior year in high school with the same sort of mentality that I see in the students that are coming in as a result of one of these events, an opportunity or something like that. Even if when the event, and I'll tell you, there were certain times at which factories closed here in Maine, the industry is closed, and the community colleges received a lot of applications for individuals that were being retrained in new fields according to the funds that are being made for when factories close like that. And to tell you the truth, I had a whole bunch of students in my classes that weren't very happy about the fact that their job had gone away, and now they were having to learn a whole new field and kind of start over and all those things. Not always, a rosy situation, and some of you may be in that kind of situation as well. You're here because you kind of need to be here. either way, we're looking at a point in life that we come across where we see people making choices and changes. I'll share with mine. So I turned 60 just the other day, and it's a monumental age. And so in our society, and one of the little crises that I'm happening is my exercise routine. My not that I've seen any loss in my performance or anything. I've seen a complete loss of motivation and struggling to kind of get back into that routine after taking a couple weeks off. Still struggling. So it can happen. So all of these things. So I started looking at alternative ways to exercise, looking at pickleball, looking at swimming more, changing my workout routine with my weight sets and stuff like that. Not a crisis in the way that is deeply sensing my identity, but it occupies my mind for this idea of aging and my physical fitness. So just an FYI, maybe a TMI, maybe too much information for you to know about what's going on in my life, but that's there. Okay, so let's look at what's the assignments are. We have a discussion and a quiz. The discussion focuses on the social perceptions of midlife. When you think about midlife, all of that thing that I talked about before that I'm trying to avoid, thinking about midlife as the midlife crisis and what's going on. Let's having a discussion about that and what does or what may this this event in life mean to you. And maybe so I had a quarter life uh, right around my birthday when I was 25 years old, and I had taken a different path in my career than the peers I had in school who had gone directly on to graduate school. And at 25, I felt like I was behind. I had not achieved the graduate degree. I was in graduate school, but I had not moved in that direction, and I had a strong commitment to that idea. And I had a sense that I had made some bad decisions, and I went through a period of time of depression associated with that. So, so even if you're not at what we would call the typical midlife age, or you're still young and spry and all that stuff, then maybe there's events that came along that caused you to take note that life is not infinite, and I need to focus on goals and things that I want to get done. So that's a great point of view to have that discussion. And then kind of the same thing, looking in chapter 9 quiz, is looking at events in your life and reporting out. You can get a little bit more, whatever you don't want to share in the discussion, you can share in the quiz. And how did these things change your behavior? How did any one of these events change your behavior? The discussion is really about addressing that social mystique about um, about midlife, less so about sharing your own midlife stuff, but you can do that certainly in there. And then sort of the same thing within within that quiz. So taking a deep dive into that. Make sure to take the perspective when you're talking about midlife crisis of Marcia's theory. How did something move from commitment, maybe it moved from foreclosure into moratorium to make a new commitment, or maybe it was in achievement. I mean, so achievement, and then something happened that moved you into moratorium again, or say moved you into foreclosure. So let's say let's say you're an individual whose kids have gone off. So your role as a parent, and then they leave, and you're forced into foreclosure for a bit. You don't have that role anymore. So that's a new, and it's circumstances beyond your control. People grow up, and then you're like, okay, what am I going to do now? You go through a crisis, start to look, and now you're into moratorium, and take that moratorium perspective to find something new that you can commit to achieve a new aspect of your identity. So that tool of Marcia's theory is an incredibly useful framework for answering that quiz question. So what did I do? What were my behaviors that I engaged in as I moved around the different aspects of my social identity? Okay, so that's it for this week. This is a very, very rich discussion, particularly because we have a very mixed age group. Anxious to see how people interact in terms of their feelings of this. People who are in their crisis state, or they're anticipating it, never been there before. Some of us who kind of left some of that behind, certainly by the time you're my age, and so I look forward to that discussion. That'll be a lot of fun. So take care, have a great week, and I will see you online.